They say if you hear the whistler at Conn Field after midnight, you won't live to see the sunrise. On October 12, 2019, a 28-year-old man named Marcus Thompson walked into that field to prove everyone wrong. 3 days later, his body was found at the exact center of the field, his face frozen in terror, his lips parted as if he'd been trying to scream. But here's what made investigators go cold. There were no footprints leading back out, only his, leading in. And when they played back the voice memo on his phone, all they heard was whistling. The same melody, over and over, until the recording cut to silence. This is the true story of Conn Field, and what happens when you ignore a warning that's been whispered for over 70 years. In many African societies, ghosts are considered evil beings that haunt people who have treated them badly while alive, often possessing supernatural powers that can cause illness or misfortune to those they haunt. But the spirit of Conn Field, it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you wronged it or not. It just waits. And when you hear that whistle echoing across the tall grass, it's already too late. The legend says the closer the whistle sounds, the farther away the danger is. But when you can barely hear it, when it's just a faint melody carried on the wind, that's when death is standing right behind you. This paradox appears in legends from around the world, where hearing the whistling close means safety, but hearing it distant means the spirit is nearby and death is imminent. Conn Field has its own version of this curse, and Marcus Thompson learned that the hard way. Let me take you back to where this all started. Conn Field sits on the outskirts of a small community about 40 miles west of what used to be called Danville, tucked between dense forest and abandoned farmland. During the 1940s, this field wasn't known for death. It was known for something far worse: betrayal. The story goes that a man named Samuel Reeves, a sharecropper who'd lived his entire life working that land, was accused by the white landowner of stealing crops to sell on his own. Samuel swore he was innocent. He had a wife, 3 children, a baby on the way. He begged for mercy, pleaded his case in front of the town council, but nobody listened. They dragged him to Conn Field on a cold November night, tied him to a post, and left him there to die of exposure. But before the cold took him, Samuel did something that would echo through the decades. He began to whistle. It was a song his grandmother taught him, an old spiritual about freedom and crossing over to the other side. The townsfolk heard it all through the night. That low, haunting melody carrying across the field, steady and unbroken, even as the temperature dropped below freezing. By morning, Samuel was dead, his body still tied to that post, his lips frozen in the shape of a whistle. And ever since that night, people say his spirit has never left Conn Field. Whistling spirits in folklore often serve as death omens, with sounds echoing through the air to signal impending disaster, their haunting melodies embodying loss and tragedy. The first recorded death came 3 weeks later. A man who'd been part of the group that tied Samuel to the post woke up screaming in the middle of the night, telling his wife he heard whistling outside their window. He went outside to investigate and never came back. They found him the next morning in Conn Field, same spot where Samuel died, his body positioned exactly the same way, lips parted, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. No marks, no signs of struggle, just terror frozen on his face. Over the next 5 years, 6 more men who were involved in Samuel's death met similar fates. Each one heard the whistling. Each one went to investigate. Each one died in that field. By the 1950s, the entire community knew the rule. Never go near Conn Field after dark. Never respond to whistling if you hear it at night. And most importantly, never, ever mock the legend. Because Samuel Reeves wasn't just a vengeful spirit. African folklore teaches that spirits of the dead who were wronged often seek to influence the lives of the living, and those who disrespect them face supernatural consequences. He was a warning, a reminder that some debts are never forgiven, even in death. Parents told their children the story. Grandparents warned their grandchildren. And for decades, people listened. The deaths stopped, Conn Field became overgrown, forgotten by everyone except the old folks who remembered what happened there. Until Marcus Thompson came home. Marcus grew up hearing the stories about Conn Field. His grandmother, Ruth, used to tell him every summer when he'd visit from the city. She'd sit on the porch, rocking in her chair, and she'd say, "Baby, don't you ever set foot in that field after dark. Samuel Reeves is still out there, waiting for someone foolish enough to test him." Marcus would nod, but even as a kid, he never believed it. He thought it was just a story old people told to keep children from wandering off at night. As he grew older, moved to Chicago, got a job in finance, and built a life far away from his small hometown, the legend of Conn Field became nothing more than a childhood memory, something he'd laugh about with his college friends over drinks. But in October 2019, Marcus got the call every child dreads. His grandmother had passed away. He flew home for the funeral, staying at the old family house that now felt too empty, too quiet without Ruth's voice filling the rooms. The service was on a Saturday. By Sunday evening, Marcus was sitting on that same porch where his grandmother used to tell him stories, drinking whiskey with his cousin Devin and two old friends from high school, James and Terrence. They were reminiscing, telling stories about Ruth when Devin brought up Conn Field. "Remember when your grandma used to scare us with that whistling man story?" Devin laughed, pouring another round. "Man, we used to be terrified of that field." Marcus shook his head, smiling. "It's just a story. There's no ghost in that field. It was probably just the wind or some animal, and people back then didn't know any better." James leaned forward, his voice lowered. "My uncle swears he heard it once. Back in '98, he was driving past the field around midnight, and he heard whistling coming from inside. Said it sounded like a church hymn." "And did he die?" Marcus asked, his tone mocking. "No," James admitted. "He drove faster and never looked back." "Exactly," Marcus said, standing up. "Because it's not real. It's a legend people use to explain coincidences. Those men probably died from guilt, or heart attacks, or who knows what. But it wasn't a ghost." Terrence raised his glass. "All right then, prove it. Go to Conn Field right now. Walk to the center, stay there for 10 minutes, and come back." The porch went silent. Devin's smile faded. "Don't do that, man. That's not something to play with." But Marcus, fueled by whiskey and grief, and the arrogance of someone who thought he'd outgrown his small-town roots, stood up and grabbed his phone. "I'll do it, and I'll record the whole thing so you can see there's nothing out there." "Marcus, your grandmother just died," James said quietly. "This isn't the time to be disrespectful." "I'm not being disrespectful," Marcus shot back. "I'm being rational. If anything, Grandma Ruth would want me to prove that there's nothing to be afraid of. She spent her whole life scared of that field. I'm going to show everyone there's no reason to be." Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Marcus left the house at 11:47 p.m. His friends tried to stop him, but he was determined. The walk to Conn Field took about 15 minutes. The night was clear, the moon almost full, casting silver light across the overgrown grass that reached waist-high in some places. Marcus turned on his phone's flashlight and started recording. "All right," he said to the camera, his voice steady but slightly slurred from the whiskey. "It's October 12th, 11:52 p.m., and I'm about to walk into the legendary Conn Field. Let's see if Samuel Reeves wants to come say hi." He laughed, but it sounded forced, echoing in the empty field. The first 5 minutes were uneventful. Marcus walked slowly toward the center of the field, narrating everything he saw: the tall grass, the smell of earth and decay, the sound of crickets. "See?" he said to the camera. "Nothing, just a field. No ghosts, no whistling, no curse." He reached what he estimated was the center, an area where the grass was slightly flattened, as if something or someone had been there before. He checked his phone. 11:58 p.m. "I'm going to stay here until midnight," he said. "And then I'm walking back, and this whole stupid legend is done." He sat down cross-legged, the phone propped up in front of him to record. The cricket stopped at exactly midnight. Marcus noticed it immediately. The silence was sudden, oppressive, like someone had thrown a blanket over the entire field. He looked around, his smile fading. "Okay, that's weird," he muttered to the camera. Then he heard it. Faint at first, almost like the wind, but unmistakable. Whistling, the same melody his grandmother used to hum when she cooked Sunday dinner. Marcus froze. His hand reached for his phone, but his fingers were trembling. This is probably just someone messing with me," he said, his voice shaking. The whistling grew louder, closer, a slow and mournful tune that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Marcus stood up, spinning around, trying to locate the source. "Devin? James? If that's you, this isn't funny." But there was no response, just the whistling, steady and relentless, circling him like a predator. His flashlight flickered once, then went out completely. The phone's screen dimmed, the battery draining impossibly fast. "No, no, no," Marcus whispered, shaking the phone. The whistling stopped abruptly. Marcus stood in complete darkness, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Then, in a voice that wasn't his own, but sounded eerily like his grandmother's, a whisper came from directly behind him. "I told you not to come here, baby." Marcus screamed. The recording cut to black. Devin, James, and Terrence waited for Marcus to come back. 1 hour passed, then 2. By 2 a.m., they called the police. Search teams combed Conn Field at first light. They found Marcus at 9:34 a.m. on October 13th, lying face up in the exact center of the field. His eyes were open, his face locked in an expression of pure terror, his lips slightly parted, as if he'd been trying to whistle. The medical examiner found no cause of death, no injuries, no signs of poisoning or heart failure. His body temperature was normal. His organs were healthy. By all medical accounts, Marcus Thompson had simply stopped living. The only clue was the voice memo app on his phone, still recording until the battery died at 3:47 a.m. Investigators played it back. For the first 10 minutes, they heard Marcus narrating his walk through the field, then the silence when the crickets stopped, then the whistling. And after Marcus screamed, the whistling continued for another 3 hours, never stopping, never changing pitch, the same haunting melody over and over. But here's the part that made even the most skeptical investigators refuse to return to Conn Field. In the last 30 seconds of the recording, just before the phone died, a second voice joined the whistling. It was Marcus, whistling along with whatever killed him. And if you listen very carefully to the recording, which the police still have locked in evidence to this day, you can hear him say, just once, in a voice that doesn't sound quite human anymore, "I'm sorry, Grandma. How would you feel if you were Marcus? If everyone you loved warned you about something, but you were too proud, too rational, too convinced that you knew better to listen?" Think about that for a moment. We all have warnings we ignore. We all have that voice in the back of our minds telling us not to do something, and we do it anyway because we think we're smarter, braver, stronger than the people who came before us. But what if those warnings existed for a reason? What if the legends we laugh at, the stories we dismiss as superstition, were actually the desperate attempts of our ancestors to protect us from something they couldn't explain but knew was real? Marcus Thompson wasn't a bad person. He was just a man who stopped believing in the things his grandmother taught him, and that cost him his life. Belief in the existence of ancestral spirits is widespread in many cultures, where ghosts are often considered beings that can cause harm to those who disrespect the traditions and warnings passed down through generations. The people of that community still won't go near Conn Field. They've tried to develop the land twice since Marcus died. Both times, construction workers reported hearing whistling at night and refused to come back. The field sits empty now, slowly being reclaimed by nature, a monument to a man who was murdered for a crime he didn't commit and the price of ignoring history. Some locals say they've heard two whistles now: Samuel's melody, slow and mournful, and a second one, slightly higher in pitch, desperate and pleading. They say that's Marcus, forever trapped in that field, whistling to warn others not to make the same mistake he did. If you ever find yourself driving past an empty field late at night and you hear whistling carried on the wind, don't investigate, don't mock it, and whatever you do, don't whistle back. Mysterious knocking and whistling in folklore consistently predict death across many cultural traditions, with the omen and outcome always being the same. Because some songs aren't meant for the living. Some melodies belong to the dead, and once you join in, once you become part of that chorus, you'll be whistling for eternity, trying desperately to warn the next person who's too arrogant to listen. The last person to officially visit Conn Field was Marcus's mother, 6 months after his death, on April 13, 2020. She placed flowers at the center of the field, the spot where her son died, and she knelt there for hours, crying and praying. When she finally stood to leave, she later told her pastor she heard whistling, not just one voice, but two, harmonizing in a way that made her blood run cold. She didn't run. She didn't investigate. She simply whispered, "I forgive you both," and walked away. She said the whistling stopped the moment she left the field. Whether Samuel Reeves found peace that day, nobody knows. But what we do know is that the deaths have stopped. For now, the field remains abandoned. The warning remains the same. And every October 12th, at exactly midnight, if you listen carefully enough from the edge of that field, you'll still hear it. That low, mournful whistling, carrying a message across the decades that some people will never learn until it's too late. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more ancient folklore and true horror stories from around the world. Because the scariest stories aren't the ones we make up. They're the ones we try to forget. And sometimes those stories refuse to let us go.